The community was deeply shaken by the accident. Accidents weren't uncommon in Greenwood, but this one felt particularly pointless. 2 young lives were drastically altered, one tragically lost. It had all occurred just a week ago, and the outcome remained uncertain. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon on June 28 in Greenwood, a semi-rural community near Phoenix, Arizona, home to about 7,000 residents. State Route 31, usually deserted on Sundays, saw only occasional traffic, a few locals heading to the general store or youths visiting friends. It was one such drive that led to the tragic events that shattered the community's peace that day. What followed in the days ahead would prove even more surreal, if ever revealed. Sarah Collins rarely disobeyed her mother's instructions. Leaving St. Mary's Church after Mass, she asked if she could bike to her friend Debbie's house later that evening. They planned to finish a school project due the next day. Promising to take the safest route through the school's field and Debbie Street, avoiding the main road, Sarah received permission from her mother, Laura Collins. Laura reminded Sarah of her first communion class at 3 p.m. and stressed the importance of being punctual, especially with Sister Angelica, her 4th grade and catechism teacher, who was strict about tardiness. David Harris, recently graduated from Greenwood High School with a hockey scholarship to Arizona State University, was elated. His father, Dr. Lionel Harris MD, Chief of Neurological Surgery at GSU School of Medicine, had gifted him a new Ford Mustang. David decided to show off his new car to friends at the school where some were playing baseball that quiet Sunday afternoon. As David turned onto School Street from First Street, acknowledging his friends' waves, his attention momentarily diverted. If he hadn't glanced away, he might have seen the young girl on the bike descending the hill. Instead, when he looked back, all he saw was the sudden appearance of Sarah on her bike from behind the shrubbery. David veered the steering wheel to the left, but it was too little, too late. In that same instant, the Mustang collided with the girl. The car careened across the road to the opposite side. David remained oblivious to the impact against a tree or the force of the steering wheel slamming into his chest. Dr. Harris was renowned as a leading researcher in neurological surgery in the Midwest, though considered a maverick by his peers. He had published several research papers exploring brain transplants as potential life-saving procedures. Despite successful experiments with laboratory animals at his GSU research clinic, he had never received approval to attempt these procedures on humans, despite the clinic being a fully certified emergency medical facility equipped with state-of-the-art research tools. Unaware, as he fulfilled his volunteer duties at the hospital several miles away, his own son and a young girl were about to provide him with an unexpected opportunity. The hospital received a call from the ambulance crew transporting 2 critically injured patients. Both victims were in unstable condition, a young male with severe chest trauma and a young female with critical head injuries. CPR was underway for the female, while the male showed erratic heartbeats and low blood pressure. The hospital went on high alert, summoning Dr. Harris to the emergency room specifically for the head injuries report. As the child was brought into the emergency room, she was taken to one examination room, while the young man was placed in another. Directed to attend to the female patient due to her severe head injuries, Dr. Harris remained unaware that his own son was in the adjacent room. The examination revealed no other injuries for the girl aside from a significant bruise on her left temple and minor cuts and scrapes on her limbs. However, her vital signs were unstable. Dr. Harris promptly ordered a CT scan and EEG for the patient. Subsequent results confirmed that the young girl was effectively brain dead, sustained only by life support systems. Dr. Stanhope, the staff physician, was informed of the male patient's identity and cautioned the emergency room staff not to disclose to Dr. Harris that his son was the other patient. Dr. Stanhope assumed responsibility, foreseeing potential emotional distress that might affect Dr. Harris's ability to treat the girl effectively. This precaution proved wise. Upon learning of his son's involvement later, Dr. Harris collapsed and was admitted overnight for observation. At 8 a.m. the following morning, Dr. Harris was discharged with instructions to rest at home. He would be updated on any developments concerning either patient. Meanwhile, both youths were admitted to intensive care. Sarah's mother also remained at the hospital, deeply affected and sedated since Monday morning upon hearing of her daughter's injuries. Over the next 3 days, the community held vigils for both young individuals. St. Mary's hosted candlelight vigils each evening at 6 p.m., while Greenwood Congregational Church organized prayer services for David. The community collectively expressed its grief and frustration with the tragic turn of events. By Tuesday morning, both patients were transferred to GSU School of Medicine's neurological clinic, better equipped to handle their injuries. Reports indicated David was experiencing neurological complications, while Sarah showed no signs of brain activity. Lionel Harris had reached a decision. It was evident to him that Sarah had passed away, although he had not yet conveyed this to her mother, knowing she would soon come to the same conclusion. As for David, his injuries from the steering wheel's impact had caused irreparable damage to his heart and lungs. Lionel had manipulated the records to indicate neurological damage in David's case, ensuring both patients could be admitted to his clinic simultaneously. His hope was that, with luck, either David or Sarah might survive, thus validating his theories on brain transplantation. Unbeknownst to himself, Dr. Harris was feeling somewhat unstable. He was convinced that saving one life outweighed saving none at all. Performing the surgery alone would be challenging, but he had all the necessary equipment and considered involving others too risky. He began the operation early Wednesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, the autopsy was complete. The medical examiner, summoned to the clinic after David's death, reviewed the data provided by Dr. Harris and opted to perform the autopsy there. He concluded that David had died on the operating table due to complications arising from the automobile accident, severe heart and lung lacerations compounded by brain swelling. Curious, the medical examiner questioned Dr. Harris about why he had removed David's brain from his skull. Dr. Harris explained it wasn't strictly necessary but provided essential research data, which he could only obtain from a recently deceased brain. Given it was his son's brain, he authorized the procedure himself. The medical examiner found this unusual but not illegal, especially considering Dr. Harris's success in stimulating brain activity in the young girl whom others believed brain dead. Perhaps this minor ethical lapse underscored the importance of his research. Thus concluded the first chapter of David Harris's life. A week after the accident, the Greenwood Police Department issued a news release absolving David Harris of responsibility for Sarah Collins's injuries. The incident was deemed an unfortunate accident, and no charges were filed against him. Light. A single point. Distant yet intense. No matter how fast I run, I can't catch up with it, David thought. Then the light faded. Laura received a call from Dr. Harris's office on a bright Saturday morning in early September. Initially anxious it concerned Sarah, she promptly returned the call. Dr. Harris greeted her, "Good morning, Mrs. Collins. Thank you for calling back so quickly." Concerned, Laura asked if anything was wrong. Dr. Harris reassured her, "Not at all. I just wanted to inform you that I believe Sarah may awaken briefly today. Prepare yourself for this possibility." Laura inquired eagerly, "Can I see her? Should I come over now?" Dr. Harris responded, "Not yet. This initial awakening can be disorienting for her. I'll inform you when you can visit. The good news is that she's improving." "Thank you, Doctor. You've been wonderful," Laura replied gratefully. After hanging up, she sank into the sofa, overwhelmed with joy and relief. Her prayers to the Blessed Virgin hadn't gone unanswered. The light returned, closer this time. It drew nearer and nearer. There's a rush of wind, David thought. Then the light vanished once more. 3 weeks later, David opened his eyes to a familiar sight. He recognized the large room filled with medical equipment and airy windows. It was his father's clinic. In the ceiling mirror, he saw a small figure swathed in bandages around its head, lying on a nearby bed. The figure seemed to be gazing at him. David tried to sit up, but found himself unable to move. He couldn't feel anything. Even moving his head proved difficult. Why was he here? Then vague memories of the crash returned. Dr. Harris entered the room, looking worn and walking with a noticeable stoop. He noticed David repeatedly glancing at the reflection in the mirror. Sitting down beside the bed, he knew he had to be honest with David. "David," he began, "we need to talk." Lionel Harris sat in his car, reflecting on his conversation with David. He knew that morning's discussion would likely be the last time he spoke to his son for a long while. He realized he needed to entrust David to Laura Connors, where David would have to assume a new identity as her daughter. Lionel felt compelled to explain everything to David, to hear from his own father how he must now navigate life as a 10-year-old again, under someone else's care. The look in the girl's eyes was heartbreaking to him. Worse still, David couldn't yet express what was going through his mind. Lionel understood David would require substantial support during this transition, which he couldn't provide. After speaking with David, Lionel wrote a detailed letter to his close friend, Dr. Ken Harrison, explaining everything and asking him to take over David's care. He trusted Ken implicitly to do what was best for David. Dr. Harris knew Ken would respect his confidence. He had disclosed everything, including his immediate resignation from the university and departure from Greenwood. He entrusted Ken with overseeing the trust fund he had set up for Sarah Collins, ensuring Sarah would have everything needed to embrace her new identity. Upon receiving Lionel's letter, Ken immediately attempted to contact him. Failing to reach him, he informed Susan, his nurse and receptionist, that he would be away for several days. He needed to see Sarah. Laura received a message from Dr. Harris, informing her that he was transferring Sarah's case to Dr. Harrison. He explained that he needed some time away following his son's death. Dr. Harris assured Laura that Dr. Ken Harrison was highly skilled, specializing in neurosurgery, child psychiatry, and psychology, all of which Sarah would require due to the nature of her injury. Dr. Harrison had graciously offered his services without charge. Dr. Harris also shared the encouraging news that Sarah had briefly regained consciousness and showed promising EEG scans, indicating improvement. Laura visited Sarah multiple times, staying late into the night, yet the little girl lying in the bed showed no signs of waking. During these visits, Laura often wept, overwhelmed by her love for her daughter and the desperate desire to see her awake again. Each time Laura visited, she saw only Sarah's head, wrapped in bandages with openings for her eyes, nose, and mouth. The room overflowed with stuffed animals and gifts from friends and classmates. During a recent visit, Laura felt a gentle squeeze from Sarah's hand, a moment that filled her with hope. Earlier, Dr. Harrison had met with Laura, introducing himself and presenting Dr. Harris's letter recommending him as Sarah's new physician. Laura was relieved and accepted Dr. Harrison's offer of assistance during Dr. Harris's absence without hesitation. "I'll need a few days with Sarah alone," Dr. Harrison explained. "I need to conduct an evaluation without distractions. Afterward, I'd like you to spend a day with Sarah at the clinic while I observe from another room via video camera. This will aid in my assessment." Curious about Sarah's prognosis, Laura asked, "Doctor, what are Sarah's chances of a full recovery?" "Given her progress so far," replied Dr. Harrison, "I would say they're very good at this point. However, I must caution you, severe brain trauma can lead to unusual behavior, possibly even amnesia, in the coming months. Patience, understanding, and support will be crucial, not just from you but from all visitors. Criticism must be avoided, and everyone should be briefed accordingly." Feeling reassured after speaking with Dr. Harrison, Laura agreed to follow his instructions diligently. She knew she would need immense strength in the months ahead, as Sarah's recovery would test her patience to the limit. After Dr. Harrison left, Laura decided to seek guidance from Father Sullivan. She picked up the phone and called St. Mary's Parish House. Meanwhile, Dr. Harrison observed his new patient, contemplating the approach he would take to help guide this young individual into embracing her new life as a girl without risking mental instability. He understood the unprecedented implications of his methods and resolved to proceed with caution. Opting for a straightforward approach, he planned to minimize medication use, starting with mild tranquilizers. Time, patience, and understanding would be paramount. Of course, cooperation from David, or rather, Sarah, was essential. Dr. Harrison recognized that this initial conversation would be crucial. If mishandled, it could jeopardize everything, leaving him with a patient who might descend into insanity. What Dr. Harrison didn't know was that Dr. Harris had already spoken to his son about these matters. David had been lost in a dream. In it, he hurried to hockey practice, only to find the field deserted. Confusion set in as the coach approached him, questioning his presence. "Practice," David replied, only to be corrected that it was the girls' field hockey session the next day. He glanced at his reflection in the glass doors, seeing a girl with long brown hair in a field hockey uniform before the dream dissolved, and he encountered the light again. David woke abruptly. Surveying the hospital room, David initially didn't register much. His gaze passed over the man seated beside his bed and scanned the room filled with stuffed animals, flowers, and cards plastered everywhere. He realized he must be in a children's ward. Unable to turn his head to see the adjacent bed, he returned his attention to the man and greeted him. To his surprise, Sarah's voice, weak but unmistakably hers, echoed in the room alongside his own greeting. The realization hit him hard, recalling his father's confession about what had been done. David silently expressed his anguish. Dr. Harrison contemplated administering a tranquilizer, suspecting Sarah was in pain, but hesitated when he heard her say, "Dad, you bastard. What have you done to me?" Surprised, he asked if she knew, to which David confirmed that he did. After reviewing Sarah's charts, Dr. Harrison decided it was time to remove the bandages covering her head and examine the surgical area. He noted having done a preliminary check 2 days prior without complications. Lionel had administered anti-rejection drugs, fortunate that both patients shared the exact blood type and closely matched tissue, minimizing the risk of rejection. "David," Dr. Harrison began, "I'm going to remove these bandages so you can see the results of your father's work. You'll decide where we go from here. I promise, if you choose not to continue, I can ease your passing without suffering, but I can't return your old body to the world. David Harris is gone. Sarah Collins survived." David replied, bravely, "Doctor, I don't have much choice. It's live as a girl now or not." He was terrified, though he tried not to show it. "Okay, David," Dr. Harrison responded, preparing to uncover the bandages. He pulled back the covers and gently began cutting away the bandages. When Dr. Harrison finished removing all the bandages, he carefully inspected the incision area. It appeared to be healing well, with no signs of infection, and the child's eyes showed good pupil contraction in response to light. "David," Dr. Harrison asked, "does everything you see appear clear and undistorted?" David replied, "Yes, everything looks good." "Let's see if you can sit up," said the doctor. Taking the child's hands, Dr. Harrison gently assisted as Sarah slowly sat up. It was encouraging to see that Sarah managed most of the movement herself. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Dr. Harrison instructed her to hold onto the rails. As he removed her gown, he couldn't help but think what a beautiful child she was. He understood why Dr. Harris had been driven to save her. If only David could grasp that perhaps his father had given him an extraordinary gift. Continuing his examination, Dr. Harrison noted that all reflexes seemed to be returning. Aside from a few bed sores, everything appeared favorable. David observed the procedure with intense curiosity reflected in the ceiling mirror. It was his first close-up view of an unclothed female child's body, delicate yet undeniably pretty even without hair. David made a decision to give this body and himself a chance at life, though he knew he owed Sarah a debt that might be hard to repay. "Doctor, I'm not one to give up. If I have to live as a little girl now, so be it," David said courageously. "Good choice, David. Choosing life is always the best path forward. Time will resolve everything. You must understand, though, that you'll face many challenges. You'll need to learn to be 10 years old again, learn to be a girl, and most importantly, learn to love a new mother," Dr. Harrison replied. David nodded. "Anything's better than being dead, right?" Yes, the doctor affirmed. From now on, let's call you Sarah. You'll need to get used to that name. By the way, your mother's name is Laura Collins, and she'll be coming to see you the day after tomorrow. Dr. Harrison noticed Sarah's sudden increase in heart rate. David stared at the reflection of the little girl in the mirror for a long while, consumed by anxiety. He worried that he wouldn't be able to convince anyone, especially Sarah's mother, that he was truly Sarah. David knew nothing about being a girl, let alone a 10-year-old one. Lost in his thoughts, David didn't notice when Dr. Harrison left and returned with clothing. "Let's get you dressed like a girl," Dr. Harrison said, laying out a pretty pink and white nightgown along with a matching bathrobe on the bed. With Dr. Harrison's help, Sarah reluctantly put on the nightgown. Feeling embarrassed as the doctor pulled it over his head, David quietly cursed his father. He felt trapped in a situation he hadn't asked for and now had to face for the rest of his life. This is never going to work. Maybe dying would have been better, David thought bitterly after Dr. Harrison left the room, leaving him alone with the girl in the mirror. Sitting in a wheelchair by the window, David looked at himself and thought, "God, I am pretty." Determination surged through him. "Damn it. I am going to make this work," he resolved before falling asleep and dreaming once more. 3 days later, David woke to sunlight streaming into a room that was no longer filled with medical equipment. Instead, he found himself in a normal bedroom adorned with pink and yellow curtains on the windows. The floor was adorned with a soft pink carpet, giving the room a blush of color. A white vanity with a large mirror stood in one corner, complemented by a pink and gold chest of drawers positioned nearby. The bed where David lay was a white canopy bed, adorned with fluffy, matching bed coverings and curtains. In another corner of the room sat the child's tea table, surrounded by all the stuffed animals that had been in the hospital room. David realized he was now in a bedroom clearly designed for a little girl, a much more pleasant environment than where he had been before. But how had he ended up here? He wondered to himself. Dr. Harrison entered the room. "Hi Sarah, I hope you like your new room. I had you moved here last night while you were asleep to minimize your stress." Sarah looked at the doctor for a moment and then asked, "Am I still in the hospital?" "No," replied Harrison. "You are now in your new bedroom that Mrs. Collins, excuse me, your mother, has prepared for your homecoming. You are home with her now. She'll be in to see you shortly. But first, I'd like to talk to you, if you're up to it." "And I think you are." "How's this, doctor?" said David, attempting to sound cheerful. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so happy." "Is Mommy really here now?" said David, trying to muster a happy voice. Dr. Harrison looked at his patient for a moment. "That's good, David. Keep it up. It's a good start." "Who is David?" asked the little girl. "Good, let's work on that assumption, David. You need to start thinking of yourself as Sarah. You really are her now, you know," said the doctor. "Tell me about it, doctor. Look at me. Could I not know who and what I am now? I am going to make this work though. I haven't got much choice now, do I?" Dr. Harrison assisted Sarah in getting out of bed and into a chair by the window, believing movement would benefit her. He was pleased with her progress. "There, is that better, Sarah?" "Yes, thank you, doctor. Much better. Sarah, you've been doing so well that I'll only visit you every couple of days now. My nurse will come by every day to change your bandages, but I think you're doing great. Tomorrow, I'd like you to try getting up and dressed for a little while. How does that sound?" "Oh, thank you, doctor. Do you really think I can get up for a while?" "Yes, young lady, I do. You need some exercise, and your mother has been instructed on what to do." "All right, doctor. I promise to do everything you say. I really want to get better." Dr. Harrison was amazed at Sarah's response. If he didn't know better, he would have thought he was talking to the real Sarah Collins. Shaking his head in bewilderment, he said, "Okay, I'm going to send your mother in now. Are you sure you're ready to handle this?" "Oh yes, doctor. Please, send her in." David was nervous, but he knew he had to start sooner or later to meet his new mother. It might as well be now. Laura Collins entered the room and went straight to Sarah. She reached out, embracing her daughter gently and kissing her on the cheek. Tears streamed down her face. "Sarah, dear Sarah, you had me so worried. Everything will be all right now." "Mommy, I was so scared." "I know, darling. I was scared too. Dr. Harrison says you're getting much better now. Dr. Harrison says I can get dressed tomorrow and get up for a while." "Yes, dear. And I'm going to have a nice surprise for you too." "Oh, that's wonderful, Mommy. Can you tell me what it is?" "Why don't you wait and see? Right now, I just want to look at you and hold you." The little girl and her mother held each other long into the afternoon. Neither wanted to break the spell. Sunlight streamed in through the window, casting a path across the floor and slowly inching its way up the bed coverings. The first rays landed on the small face of an angel asleep. David opened his eyes in response to the light. Feeling an urgent need to go to the bathroom, he swung his legs out of bed and immediately realized how far the floor was from his feet. Looking down, he suddenly became aware of his new situation. It wasn't just the distance to the floor, but that he was now much smaller. Remembering he was now a child, David clung to the bedpost, finding his legs reluctant to move well. Glancing around, he spotted the door leading out to the hallway. David entered the bathroom and began to reach for himself as he stood facing the toilet. His hand brushed against the soft material of his nightgown. Chuckling to himself, he murmured, "Silly me, I have to remember to sit down now to pee." David lifted the hem of his nightgown and sat on the toilet. He immediately noticed the difference in how he urinated. It sprayed out rapidly instead of in a stream. Finishing, he realized the need to wipe himself, his first act of this kind as a girl, which felt strange. David wondered what other myriad things he would find different. Laura rushed into the bathroom just as David stood up and flushed the toilet. "Sarah, what are you doing? Why didn't you call me? You could have hurt yourself." "I'm all right, Mother. I had to go pee, and I didn't want to wake you." "Oh, honey, don't worry about that. I know you're not well yet. I will always come when you need help." Laura noticed the huge smile on Sarah's face and knew she had just overcome a major hurdle, walking on her own. Both mother and daughter smiled at each other. "You're walking, dear." "Yes, Mother." "Isn't it great?" said Sarah. Sarah reached out and put her arms around Laura's neck. They hugged each other tightly. David thought to himself, "Nice going, kid." Laura removed the nightgown from Sarah, and while they were in the bathroom, she ran a small amount of warm water in the bathtub and had her daughter sit in the tub for a sponge bath. Needless to say, David took this opportunity to examine his new body up close. He couldn't believe how different he now looked and felt. He was somewhat embarrassed, but also enjoyed having a pretty lady do the work. Laura was ecstatic. She had her daughter back and was determined that nothing would ever happen to her little girl again. From now on, she would fuss over and care for her, ensuring she became nothing less than the epitome of a classical feminine child. Finishing the wash, she helped Sarah out of the tub and wrapped a bath towel around her. "How do you feel now, sweetie?" "Wonderful, Mother. I feel so nice and clean now. It's been a long time since I felt this good." "That's great, dear. Let's get you dressed, and then I'll give you your surprise. I have some lovely new clothes for you to wear." Laura gently supported Sarah as they walked back into her bedroom. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed while Laura went into the closet and retrieved a few items wrapped in white cloth bags. She also brought out a large round box with a lid on it. David looked at the items but couldn't see through the opaque bags. He felt a bit nervous, knowing he would soon have to start wearing girls' clothes. He hoped they would be somewhat neutral and not overly frilly or lacy. Opening a dresser drawer, Laura laid out a pink nylon set of panties and a camisole with delicate pink and white lace trim. She also placed a pair of pink brocade pantyhose on the bed. David examined the clothing and realized any hope for neutral attire was gone. It was clear his new mother intended to dress Sarah in a very feminine and pretty manner. He thought to himself, well, what did you expect? I'm a pretty little girl now. Laura turned to her daughter with a smile. Let's get you dressed. Holding the waistband of the panties open, Laura helped David step into them, pulling them up his small legs and over his buttocks. As David finished putting on the camisole and pantyhose, he looked at his reflection in the dresser mirror. He saw the image of a little girl with a bald head dressed in pink underwear looking back at him. Suddenly, he was acutely aware of his new identity and felt overwhelmed with fear about the future. He started to softly weep, like any frightened little girl would. Laura drew him close and hugged him. What's the matter, Sarah? Do you need to lie down? Laura asked, concern evident in her voice. No, Mommy. I'm just scared. Don't be, dear. I won't let anything happen to you again. I promise, Laura reassured him. After a short while, Sarah calmed down and sat on the bed as her mother removed the items from the cloth bags. David's mouth fell open as he saw the beautiful pink and white party dress and white bouffant slip that Laura laid beside him on the bed. They were stunning. Laura then opened a round box and took out an exquisite long brown child's wig. These are your surprises, dear. No more bald head for you. Dr. Harrison said you can wear this wig until your hair grows out without any fear of infection, Laura explained. David had to admit, if he had to dress like a little girl, these items were certainly beautiful choices. Soon, Laura had Sarah dressed and placed the wig on her head. The hair fell straight down her back, almost reaching her waist. Laura applied a bit of blush to Sarah's cheeks and gently brushed it in. There, dear. All done, Laura said with a smile. When David looked in the mirror this time, he was taken aback. Looking back at him was the prettiest little girl he had ever seen, an angelic sight. David almost felt overwhelmed realizing he was now Sarah. The little girl hugged her mother tightly. A new life was beginning from that moment. In the first few days, David felt incredibly awkward, but he found it gradually getting easier. His biggest challenge was learning how to act as a little girl instead of a 19-year-old man. It's good not to be confined to the bed anymore, David thought to himself. Sarah had now been home for over a month. She had met a few friends from school, and while recognizing them and understanding their relationship with her took some mental adjustment, it was manageable. Her meeting with Father Sullivan was particularly pleasant. She immediately took a liking to this gentleman. Father Sullivan had brought her a new prayer book and catechism as a gift, telling her she had been blessed with a special gift from God that she should study and treasure. Did he have some sort of sixth sense about her real self? Sarah wondered. She planned to discuss this with Father Sullivan later. Today was Saturday, and her mother had promised to take her to the mall for some new clothes. It would be Sarah's first time outside the house since coming home from the hospital. She was going to be fitted for a communion dress, as her first communion was scheduled in 2 weeks. Despite his apprehensions about venturing outside as a girl, David felt it was something he needed to do. He had been indoors for far too long. Dr. Harrison had visited a couple of times to check on his young patient, and even he was uncertain about who he was treating. He was amazed at how David seemed to be embracing the persona of little Sarah more than expected. Her physical health was improving daily, but Dr. Harrison's main concern was her psychological adjustment to her new identity. He felt that if she continued to progress mentally, he would soon no longer need to make in-home visits. He informed Mrs. Collins that she could now take Sarah on short outings. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in her room on Sunday morning while her mother finished preparing her for the day. Sarah admired herself in the mirror as her mother placed the white veil on her head to complete her communion ensemble. Sarah was deeply content with her appearance and emotions. This marked a beautiful culmination of her arduous journey of recovery and transformation. She silently offered a prayer of gratitude and then embraced her mother. "I love you very much," she whispered. Laura held her daughter close, tears glistening in her eyes. She whispered softly, "Thank you, dear. I love you very much too." It felt surreal. Here I was, about to embark on an entirely new life. Not only was I a child again, but now I was a girl. I had a new mother, a new home, and now I was preparing to embrace a new religion as I stood in line with the other girls at the church entrance in my communion dress. If I hadn't lost my mind by now, I figured I could handle whatever else life threw at me. As I knelt at the altar rail and received the host on my tongue for the first time, a strange sense of solitude washed over me. I offered my prayer of thanksgiving and made the sign of the cross. Sitting beside my classmates in the pew, I silently prayed for Sarah Collins. I wanted to express my gratitude for her gift to me. It felt as though Sarah heard me. I had fully become Sarah. I focused on my prayers and sought the Blessed Virgin's intercession for Sarah, my benefactor. I truly became Sarah. Over time, I grew to love Laura Collins, the woman who had birthed this body, if not my mind. I came to rely on her for everything. She became, at least to me, my mother. Returning to school and Sarah's fourth-grade class, I eventually embraced the freedom of being a child again, even if it meant being a girl. I must admit, the experience of being a little girl became exhilarating and enjoyable. Now 16, I'm attending my junior prom at St. Mary's. My date, Tommy Geller, is wonderful, a true gentleman who treats me like royalty. I genuinely like him, and even my mom approves of him. I hope to marry him someday. "Thank you, Sarah, from the bottom of my heart," I thought, hearing a distant reply, "You're welcome, David."